Welcome back to the Jake Bequette Show podcast. I'm your host, Jake Bequette, back in the house for another great episode this Memorial Day weekend. I hope everyone's having a great Memorial Day. Obviously, a lot happening this week. I'll address all the presidential primary, all the political knife fighting at a later date. There's plenty of time to sort that out. This weekend, I wanted to share a message about Memorial Day and my thoughts on this holiday, our place for honoring those who have given their lives in sacrifice for this country and what that means in our culture today. Some news from this week, just personally, I was on the Alex Stein show this week. Make sure and check that out. It was good to be on with Alex. Obviously, he's a wild man. He's a comedian. A lot of his show is meant to be humorous, but I think he really has a gift for humiliating those in the regime, and I really think that's one of the ways that we can fight back in this culture is through the sheer force of mockery. And Alex understands that. That's the way he's entered the fight, and it was fun to get on his show, speak a bit about my background in sports and the military, and then just talk about some of the things happening in our culture today. So go and check that out on the Alex Stein podcast, prime time. I believe it was Thursday. So go and check that out from this week. But on to Memorial Day. I just want to, I remember every Memorial Day when I was playing for the Patriots, Coach Bill Belichick would always, late May, Memorial Day weekend it's during it's during the spring minicamp time for pro football teams. So the team is practicing and working out together. And so we always had a Memorial Day meeting, typically on the Thursday or Friday before the long weekend. And Coach Belichick, growing up in a family, his dad, Steve Belichick, was a coach at the Naval Academy for many years. And so Bill grew up in Annapolis. He grew up looking up to the Naval Academy, to the midshipmen, to the players, to the coaches. And he was inculcated with a very healthy appreciation for our nation's military elite, military warfighters, and those who have given their lives serving this country. And so he would always kind of gather the team in the team meeting room, and he would quiz members of the team, typically rookies, ask them about, hey, what does Memorial Day mean? What's the significance of the day? And what does it mean to you personally? And I think it's an important question for all of us to consider this weekend. And I just wanted to take the time on this podcast to share a bit about what Memorial Day means to me. And there's a brilliant new article out this weekend, Memories of the Fallen by Philip Voodoo. He's a Twitter poster. You can find this article at im1776.com. And he was a GWAT, a Global War on Terror veteran, as I am. And I think he really did a great job of capturing the meaning of Memorial Day, particularly in the year 2023, looking back. And I'm going to read some excerpts from this article and give some commentary because I thought it was really interesting. And just to start with, the article begins, Why Memorial Day is Worth Celebrating. Quote, from the first settlers dying at the hands of an alien enemy's war club, to a draftee killed by a Wehrmacht mortar in the Hurtgen forest, to the young surfer hit by an EFP outside of Najaf, America's sons have fought and died for 2.5 centuries in a myriad of wars. Despite the soft visions forced upon us by modern media and the internet, at our core, we are a warrior people. For better and for worse, Americans fight. Now, I think that is absolutely true. That is a great encapsulation of what once was the American spirit. You go back and think, I'm always in awe thinking about the early American settlers, the early colonists. They were fleeing religious persecution, most of them in the old world. And as in every human conflict, there's an inherent choice that has to be made, fight or flight. I think most people initially they fight, and then if fighting doesn't work out, digging in your heels where you are, you have another choice. You can either stand there and suffer, accept the consequences of what's happening, or do a more courageous thing and go somewhere else. I think flight gets a bad rap in this sense because it took a lot of courage for those early American settlers to flee, to cross an ocean and go to a new world. But that's exactly what they did. They came to a world that was filled with um, wild animals and natives that were, in many cases, violent, fought in a way that was totally unfamiliar to the European customs. And they had to forge a new world out of nothing. And that's why many of the first waves of settlers were wiped out completely. They weren't equipped for the task. But they kept coming back and they kept trying and they fought through droughts and blizzards and crop failures, Indian attacks, and they survived. And those that survived had that warrior spirit. You had to make it in those days. And that really is the ethos that I think defines what it means to be an American, or at least it did. The article continues, the veterans of the Global War on Terror, GWOT, share some of the same dilemmas as the veterans of the Vietnam War. How do you honor the dead of a deeply unpopular political war that is generally viewed as a failure? The difference is that none of us was drafted to fight the GWOT. We made a choice to give up a more or less comfortable existence at home to share camaraderie and danger together. We knew what we were doing. We knew Iraq and Afghanistan would never become post-war Germany and Japan, yet we signed up nonetheless. I think that's very well said. It is true of those who fought in Iraq and Afghanistan that we weren't forced to go there. We weren't drafted. It's not something that we did against our will. And that was something that I take a lot of pride in. I had a nice career in college and pro football. I was in law school and I was living a pretty comfortable life. And I decided to put that on pause, to leave that behind maybe forever if I died in uniform, to go and do something that was difficult. It was something that I felt called and compelled to do, and I'm glad that I did. And that's I'm really glad that paragraph was written because that really captures the mindset. I mean, really, especially those who were officers and those who may have left behind a comfortable existence. There was a sacrifice there. And if you're going to have an all-volunteer force, if you're going to have a country where free men fight for it, you're going to have that attitude that America is worth it. And that's kind of what the article is getting to. It continues. It is easy for veterans of the GWOT to look back on 2 decades of warfare with bitterness, to feel betrayed by the government, by the military, and even by our own countrymen. To have seen so many lives wasted for little gain is one of the greatest current blemishes on the contract between the government and the people. But resentment and bitterness are not fitting for veterans. Modern culture encourages self-victimization. It is also the exact opposite of what the dead would have wanted, and the easiest way to turn one casualty into 2, and then into a bigger problem still. The nation looks to its veterans for moral authority, and if veterans show nothing but self-centered despair, it saps our nation of the warrior spirit it needs. Now, those are pretty compelling paragraphs there, and I'm not sure if I totally agree with the sentiment. I believe that there can be no higher form of patriotism than to rebel against the current system if that system is doing evil things. It's like that commentary from the movie The Last Samurai. I think that movie's really good, by the way. You should watch it. But Tom Cruise is narrating in that movie, and he's describing this rogue samurai who's carrying out a rebellion against the emperor in Japan. And Cruise is narrating. He's saying that he was fascinated to find out that this rogue samurai, he believed that his rebellion was in service to the emperor. And I don't think going along with our evil empire in the current regime, going along with that blindly is not really a form of patriotism, especially when our country very, very openly states that, hey, one of our chief tenets of foreign policy is raising the rainbow flag around the world. Imposing this radical left-wing worldview across planet Earth. Not spreading It's almost a sick and sadistic, twisted form of evangelism. They are making disciples of all nations, just disciples of an evil, demonic worldview. And yeah, I mean, going along with that blindly is not patriotic, in my opinion. But I understand what the author here is getting at, is that this country has no hope, it has no future, if good men feel that it is no longer worth dying for. And I think that's part of what's happening right now, to be quite frank. I mean, I did an episode earlier about the military's recruiting crisis in all the branches, but particularly in the Army and the Marine Corps, who do most of the on-the-ground fighting in America's wars. And what's happening is, what is spurring this recruiting crisis? I mean, there are a lot of factors, but I think at its core, what's spurring this recruiting crisis is these multi-generational veteran families that have had, 4 or 5 generations successively who have served in uniform. They have totally let go of the rope. They've decided that America is no longer worth dying for, and they will do anything to prevent their kids from wearing the uniform. Now, that is evidence of a dying regime, of a dying country. And what the regime is doing in response is, they're not giving up. They're not just going to abandon having a military. They're just going to fill the military with the types of people who are going to be loyal to their worldview, who will eventually be totally comfortable with obeying orders to come after us. That's just, I mean, that's what always happens in any left-wing takeover of any government. Whether it was France in the French Revolution, whether it was Red Communist Russia in the Russian Revolution, whether it was Pol Pot in Cambodia, Mao, the Cultural Revolution, the Great Leap Forward in China. It's the same everywhere you go. The military is eventually used against the kulaks, against the middle class. So that might be where I depart a bit from the author here, but I do agree with his sentiment that if the red-blooded American patriots of the country, if Middle America, if the Iowa farm boys, if the Arkansas farm boys, if the Texas farm boys, so to speak, of this country, if they decide that America is no longer worth dying for, then America is no longer a country at all. It's a regime that is totally at odds and against its own people. Skipping ahead a bit in the article, dying in battle itself isn't noble. Those of us that have seen death on the battlefield know how random and ugly it is. It is better to survive and win, but men do not control our own fate. The old Emerson poem honoring Chief Tecumseh says it best, quote, "When it comes your time to die, be not like those whose hearts are filled with the fear of death, so that when their time comes, they weep and pray for a little more time to live their lives over again in a different way. Sing your death song and die like a hero going home," end quote. I think that's very well said, and I think that's why, when I think about the way that our modern culture is structured, I kind of laugh when I think about, I mean, imagine if someone like King David, or an ancient, or Alexander the Great, or one of these ancient warriors, or even someone like George Washington, if they could jump in a time machine and have to spend 24 hours in modern American culture, they would be either killed or thrown in prison or into an insane asylum or executed almost immediately. Because this culture is specifically designed to break men's spirit. Okay? It is that dying 1,000 deaths that we'll get to here in the article. That is specifically what our modern culture does to people. And that's one of the reasons why I started this podcast, is that I wanted to make an exhortation to young people, young men in particular, that it doesn't have to be this way. Historically, it's not supposed to be this way. We can find spaces, we can create spaces where we can fight back against this cultural zeitgeist, the way things are. And it's going to change eventually. The pendulum's going to swing back, and we're going to be on the cutting edge of that. We're going to change things, and we're going to win. But it's going to be hard. There's going to be casualties. There's going to be struggle. Because that's what it takes to break free. Again, you have 2 choices, fight or flight. If fighting doesn't work, you either flee and create something new, or you stay and choose to suffer. The article continues, skipping a bit. This is why celebrating our fallen is more important than ever. We are not honoring their, quote, glorious death in battle, but their willingness to stand and fight for what they believed was important. We also celebrate them in order to fill our countrymen with the reassurance that they are not alone and that good men and women are still willing to fight and die. Reassured in the knowledge we will stand side by side facing whatever comes. In the end, death comes for everyone, but a coward dies 1,000 times before his death. That's the quote that I was referencing. And that is certainly true. And I think that's the main message that the author of this great article is trying to impart, is that as soon as we decide collectively that America is no longer worth standing for and fighting for and potentially dying for, then it's time to spit the bit and do something else, find something else. Okay? And that country is not long for this world. We'll see. The last two paragraphs. Celebrating bravery and sacrifice does not trivialize death, nor does it pretend that every death is for a noble cause. It celebrates nobility of spirit and reinforces it in all of us. We honor the memories of the dead in order to remind our countrymen that to stand and to fight is itself to be celebrated as a testament to the American will and the spirit of free men who will never surrender. 2.5 centuries of Americans who have died in order to pass on that opportunity are counting on us. As long as there are free men willing to fight and die for the noblest ideals of America, there will be an America worth fighting and dying for. And the men who have returned home wrapped in America's flag will not have died in vain. So go, enjoy your barbecues, watch your children play outside, join the communities you have built to celebrate those who are gone and to create something great for those who are yet to come. I think that's the most important line of the entire work. To create something great for those who are yet to come. Because to be honest, what's here right now is not great. I know that it may not be popular to say that, but the current system, our current culture, our current society, the country itself, is in an awful place. It has been for a long time. People don't want to say that out loud, but I will. That's why I'm here. That's why I wore the uniform. That's why I ran for office, and that's why I'm here today, is to share that message with you courageously, because it has to be said and it has to be acted upon. And that's where I truly appreciate the sentiment of this article, but I think it is more courageous to take a cold appraisal of the situation and realize that something has to change. Okay, just throwing yourself into the meat grinder of the globalist American empire is not probably the best use of your life. There is honor in that, but I think there are better ways. I will never encourage someone not to join the military if that is what they truly feel called by God to do. People ask me all the time, would you join the military? Right now, I would not. I'm not in the military. I left the military. What happened with the vaccine mandates, what happened with all the indoctrination, what I saw in Iraq. I mean, it's ridiculous. What we're doing right now in many ways is antithetical to what this country is supposed to be. That's why there's a recruiting crisis. That's why the military is failing to retain some of their best and brightest. And that's why I would say, that's why I have declined. That's why I'm doing something else. But there are good men in our military, and there are good men who feel called to serve in our military. What I'm saying is that we have to channel the honor of sacrifice. What Memorial Day immortalizes. We have to. I mean, in my mind, what it comes down to is that there's no better way to memorialize the fallen than to take a candid look at the system and say that we have failed you, and that the best way that we can honor your memory and your legacy is to go in a different path. So that's my message to you this Memorial Day, is that as you think about those who fought even before the American Revolution, those who crossed the Atlantic, that cold ocean, who forged these colonies, who then rebelled against the greatest empire at that time in the world, who fought the British off again who went through an awful civil war. The great warriors on both sides of that civil war, by the way. And again, yeah, just to be very frank, I think it's absolutely ridiculous this modern this modern movement to vilify the Confederate soldiers. Okay, they were fighting for their land. You know, they were fighting for their country, and that sacrifice has always been honored in American history. President Dwight Eisenhower had a portrait of Robert E. Lee in the Oval Office. He said Lee was one of the greatest Americans who ever lived. Okay, so don't give me this crap that if you fought for the Confederacy, you were somehow evil. Okay, that's ridiculous. I should do another podcast on that subject entirely. But after the Civil War, we conquered the West. We conquered the Spanish territories in our hemisphere. We fought in the Great War in World War II. And every American who fought in Korea, who fought in Vietnam, who fought in the first Gulf War, and then the global war on terror. Every American who wore that uniform put his life on the line, and especially on this day, on Memorial Day weekend, were one of those who gave their lives in service to this country. Because as the men fought for Rome because Rome was good, Americans fought for this country because America is good. We're not there anymore. We've lapsed. This regime, in many ways, is the antithesis of what it was founded to be. Okay, you read the works of our founders. You read Washington's farewell address. I mean, what's happening in this country is it could not be more antithetical to that. So on this Memorial Day, especially, honor the fallen, honor those who have made the ultimate sacrifice for this country. But if you have the courage to think even deeper about it, ask yourself what they would want. What would be the best way to honor their legacy? Would it be to continue down this road of hanging pride flags around the world, advancing DEI, fighting for the pocketbooks of defense contractors in Eastern Europe? Or would it be to reclaim and reestablish what it truly means to be an American? That's my question and my challenge to you this Memorial Day. And I hope you have a blessed weekend. I hope you spend it with your family. And we'll see you next time. And until then, God bless America.